You may say he wanted back.
Madam Speaker, and good evening. I haven't spoken in the House for a while, so perhaps I'd just like to start with a shout out to all of those in the Wairarapa electorate, from Central Hawke's Bay, Darua and the Wairarapa. Spring is here. Most have had tax relief. Interest rates are on the way down. Hard-working parents are now able to get family boost payments. Commodity prices are better than they have been. And just in case the news hasn't got through, announced today, the inflation genie is back in the box. Inflation is now at 2.2% for the year ended September, and the darkness before dawn, as Nicola Willis previously described the state of the economy under the previous administration, is finally starting to lift. Thank you for trusting us as a government to manage the economy out of recession.
And that's your minute to do general debate. Now you will speak to the bill.
We have the bill.
Thank you. Now, the Crimes Theft by Employer Amendment Bill in the name of Kamala Belich is not one that we can support. The bill has been introduced for the purpose of criminalising the act of employers intentionally failing to pay employees rather than treating it under civil law. The main provisions: the bill would insert new section 220AA into the Crimes Act 1961 to provide that an employer's intentional failure to pay an employee any money owed in relation to the employment is theft. The bill would also set maximum penalties for this new offence of theft by employer. If the employer is an individual, the maximum penalty would be 1 year's imprisonment, a fine of $5,000 or both. In any other case, the maximum penalty would be a fine of $30,000. We have a view in the National Party that a significant number of employers are good employers. Yes, there will always be a very small number of employers that aren't, but that doesn't mean we need to run around and impose new legislation to address an issue that already has a clear pathway of resolution. That pathway, which I might add, is a long-held practice in New Zealand's civil jurisdiction of addressing issues of the sort that this bill seeks to address, or reinvent, of doing so through a civil process. This bill is unnecessary as there are prevailing mechanisms that actually already exist. The Employment Relations Act contains provisions to address circumstances where an employee isn't paid paid less than the amount stated in their employment agreement. The Holidays Act contains provisions that address non-compliance and also allow for interest to be paid on any unpaid entitlements. And the Wages Protection Act and the Minimum Wage Act contain provisions preventing unlawful wage deductions. Transferring the ability to adjudicate a dispute to a criminal court won't speed up the process. It will almost certainly slow it down, which will not result in any improvement in outcome. All this bill will do is transfer said disputes from the employment relations space for potentially deductions from pay slips and not paying into the criminal prosecution space. This, Madam Speaker, will more than likely result in a number of unintended and unnecessary consequences. So to sum up, Madam Speaker, at present the failure to pay an employee is currently dealt with as a civil matter under the Employment Relations Act, where the mechanisms I've already mentioned exist, where the employer and the employee have a clear duty to act in good faith, and penalties already exist if they don't do just that. And actual theft of money is dealt with under criminal law. And I refer to an article 23rd of May 2023 that says, and I quote, "Such a law could, however, potentially make it far more challenging to undertake a deduction from wages, even in valid cases, and has the potential to foreseeably expose the employer to criminal liability, or at least the threat of such risk." The Wages Protection Act 1983 and 40 years of case law makes it very clear on how a deduction is to be actioned. The advent of this may give miscreant employees more impetus to refuse to allow deductions in legitimate cases, end of quote. So we don't need to impose further unnecessary complications on those in our region that are the lifeblood of our local economies, those small, medium businesses that have persevered for far too long under the burden of a recession they didn't cause. Not now, when there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's not necessary to implement new and needless legislation, adding frustration, cost and complexity. That's why National doesn't support this bill, Madam Speaker. Perhaps Labor may want to reflect on this bill. Perhaps, Madam Speaker, they've been sidetracked dreaming up further ways of relieving those in our communities that have endured so much for so long under their administration. The Labor Party's latest attempt to do this seems to be fixated on not only more rules, but more tax. They seem quite addicted to tax, Madam Speaker. I'll get to the bill, but they'd tax our land, they'd tax our beds, and they'd tax the tables upon which we're fed. Yes, back to the bill. All this bill does is transfer disputes, potentially around deductions from pay slips and not paying, from the employment relations space into the criminal space. And we believe that would have all manner of unintended consequences. We heard in the Select Committee from the community law centres of Aotearoa that they expressed concern that the offence would be difficult to prove and easy to defend, noting that dishonesty offences are typically very difficult to prove. Business New Zealand noted the very high threshold that beyond reasonable doubt imposes in criminal cases, and compared to the balance of probabilities standard in the employment court, and how this makes proving intention especially burdensome for prosecutors. The New Zealand Council of Trade Unions pointed out that mens rea can be very hard to establish for non-natural persons, as my parliamentary colleague Carl Bates alluded to earlier. It was a very good speech from Carl, the very hard-working member for Parliament from Wanganui. It's a great electorate, that, almost as good as the Wairarapa. The New Zealand Law Society, they submitted that Section 219 of the Crimes Act 1961 frames theft with reference to dishonestly and without claim of right, taking, using or dealing with property. They contended that the use of intentionally in Clause 4 could inadvertently capture situations where employers genuinely withhold paying employees money owed. That Clause 4 could create situations where employers are made criminally liable for not paying money that is legitimately and intentionally disputed, while the employer lacks the intention to deprive their employee of what they are owed. And overall, there are existing provisions in the Employment Relations Act, as mentioned previously, to protect employees with pay disputes, and the use of the Crimes Act would have too many adverse consequences and be too difficult to prove. So, as I said, Madam Speaker, the National Party, apologies? Yeah, I can do lots of pages if you like.
Member was reading quotes.
I could finish my poem if the member over there would like. It took me a while to write. I was just talking about how they tax our tractor and they tax our ute. And that's
now you're back on the
back on track, Madam Speaker.
Back to the bill.
So, to finish off, National won't be supporting this bill. It's unnecessary. It just adds more regulations, another complexity that employers don't need. There are many mechanisms that already exist to protect employees. Madam Speaker, we do not support this bill.
Is Mike a cherry farmer? Because that was a lot of cherry picking. And also, this is coming from the guy who wants to put a fucking road toll on, the
hard-working Tauranga locals.
Yeah, it's like, dude, come on.
And for someone who's here, National and ACT have always prided themselves, we need to give them a short, sharp shock. So, when you sit down there and don't turn up to your benefit seminar, we're going to cut your benefits. Ask questions later, because, that's how we sit down. If you sit down there and what do you call it, do a rain raid, we need a short, sharp shock. So when you steal someone's wages, you need a short, sharp shock, having the police knocking on your door in front of your wife and your kids going about wage theft, or in front of all your employees. Oh, no, we don't want the embarrassment of being admitted with our bully boy behaviour. We've got to sit there and say it's a civil matter.
Dave on the chat thread said that he can't even stay on track. That's right. He was just he spent over 1 minute just ranting about the economy. The economy is turning around because of the steps that has been already taken by previous government, and it's not because of what they have done. What they have done is actually killing the economy. Look, two things here. He said that this is the vast majority of New Zealand employers, business owners are honest people. We agree. However, he also said that there are tiny minorities that do this. Just because it's been perpetuated by a tiny minority, it's okay. It doesn't need to be legislated. That's the message that I got from him. Other than that, he was just uttering nonsense, rubbish. At the end of the day, I do not expect anything from the national. Like I said before, these people don't believe it's word that they're saying, and deep inside they probably believe this legislation, this bill is the right thing to do. They know that a lot of hardworking Kiwis get ripped off by their employers, and it's like I said. They got paid millions of dollars by big businesses to be elected. So they have to do this. Otherwise, they're not going to get a penny next time. So that's the only thing I can say. It really is this. I have nothing to say on this.
For Rajan on there about saying, is benefit payment a civil matter? Paying the benefits, yes. But I can also tell you right now, if you have a debt created as a beneficiary, before you can even go, show me the money, or show me the breakdown how you came to that debt, they're already taking it off you at $10.50 a week, and that even if you go, oh, but I don't agree with the debt, suspend the payments. No, we're going to suspend payments here. I can assure you it's right. Show me the money. Oh, I can just assure you it's right. So, and I mean, that's like a very standard approach that happens at work and income. You have to go, well, if you can't show me, can you show a high court judge? Oh, no. I go, if you don't turn up in front of a high court judge, I'll ask them to send a warrant to arrest you. And if that's in front of another beneficiary, that will be fine.
Someone get Sam orange juice, vitamin C, a distress.
Yeah, but basically, so, but there's something there. So, however, if you have a debt where, say, an employer's withholding money, you can't just go, well, I can just take it out $10.50 a week until it's paid off. You know, you can't just go to the courts and say, put an attachment order against my employer's pay packet. You know, it doesn't work that way. You know, you need to go through a whole process to prove it. But, you know, how hard are you, are you going to be actually able to get that? So while, so this is the short, sharp shock people, the poor, the vulnerable, whereas, you can't even have the, but it's wrong according to Mike Butterick or to, what's that guy up in Northland, MP for Northland, Grant McKellen, who sits there and says he doesn't want people knocking on the door at 6:30 at night saying you've been accused of wage theft. The short, sharp shock process should not apply to the employer. But why can't it apply to the employer? I'll put it this way. If you're an employer who just sits down there and just keeps doing that, having a police officer or two turn up to your house will scare the living shit out of you if you've been intentionally exploiting someone. That might be the corrective tool that's needed to get payment. But sitting there and saying, but we can't have that method, or let's sit there and put it on the never and devolve it to the courts. That doesn't sit there and feel justice, And I mean, you can't even sit there and say you're having money withheld from there. You can't walk into, say, Mike Butterick's farm, if let's say he's the employer, and sit down there and take, what do you call it, all his sheep, equivalent to the wage packet, or a bunch of tools to a wage packet, because that would be theft as a servant for the employee. And I'm pretty sure Mike would actually want that person dragged through the coals if someone went onto his farm and sat there and did that. And on top of that, hey, you can take the jelly bean jar that figures in his office, which Laura probably remembers what I'm talking about in there. But,
and he was also annoyingly, he was misrepresenting some of those submissionists.
Yes,
from
he was.
The CTU,
Yep.
and he was lying. That's not what they said. I mean, as a union every union organizer can tell you it's very, very easy to prove that if the employee, I mean, in Mecca, we got, if the employer doesn't pay, it was in 72 hours. It's clearly stated in our collective. If they don't rectify, if they don't pay the employee within 72 hours till their lost wages, and then it becomes a wage theft. Okay, it would have but when people deliberately decide to lie, there is nothing much you can do about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting too that, I mean, another angle that may need to be looked at also will be commission paid workers. You see, there's those like wages and salary. You have all the rights and all the rules and all those. Mm-hmm. But for those who are contracted to, like the Uber drivers and like brokers in insurance, in money broking, there is no protection really, because if you're the principal consultant, right, or the owner, right, he controls all the funds, so it goes through him, right? So you may have your what they call brokerage accounts, but you don't have access to it. So you can use your money, play it around, buy shares, and then the next moment you might be bankrupted or accused of fraud, but he can even use your accounts to do it. And then he gets away with it, and you have to, go through all the things you have to go through and falsely accused of fraud, be bankrupted. So I think there needs to be maybe following like the Australian and US side, where they have protection mechanisms also for contractors to employers. Means they don't get paid unless they do a sales, which is probably worse than, at least wages, you get the wage, you get holidays, right? But for the commission ones, I'm not sure whether Uber is...
I mean, I can completely relate to that, being self-employed myself. And, I can tell you, since Tauranga, was it local bodies, I've pretty much basically been backwards and forward on the breadline. Like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my $800 GST bill that's due on the 29th. I'm going to pay it somehow, but I know that particular side of it in there. There's no such thing called holidays. I mean, why do I take the coffee cart to Vinegar Hill for New Year's? So I can sit there and earn an income while having a holiday. You know, that sort of thing there. But yeah, that you are right. You know, like, should it just stop at the wage worker, or should it go to, say, the like, you know, what would be equivalent of a wage salary worker of like a commissioned like insurance sales rep, is like what you said. You know, should that also be brought into the scope of the law? Actually, was there an intention to include that in the scope of law, Ibrahim?
What was that? Say that again, Sam.
So if you have, say, commission-based employees such as insurance brokers where their only payment is based on commission, would that also be taken into the same account?
Would they be also protected in your bill?
Would they be protected?
Which one should be included in the not?
In my view, they should, and if it can be proven, you know, it's you basically asking me is should they be considered under this bill? Is that the question, Sam?
Yeah, that would be the question. Yeah, or has that part been looked at?
Any employee that's contracted somehow to do any kind of job for employer falls into this legislation or into this bill. So if they're not getting paid, if their wages are being withheld somehow against their will, then yes.
Yeah. Okay.